What we find with most people is they don't know where to begin with their health. It often feels like they're on a bit of a roller coaster. There's symptoms that show up that maybe weren't there before, and they really feel like they're out of control. And we always find that if there's a structure, if there's a process, if there's a roadmap in order to start to make some massive difference in someone's health, it often starts with understanding the role of your metabolism and fasting and in your hormonal system.
Yeah, we often talk about how our relationship to nourishment and food and our diet is a reflection of our relationship to everything. So symptoms like weight gain or fatigue or brain fog, like these things show up and we don't often know where to start. But if we can just start looking at what am I doing to nourish myself, it can create more clarity.
Mm-hmm. So the word fasting and balancing hormones, it may seem like a scary place to be. It may sound like starvation. It may sound like wasting away. It may sound like slowing down your metabolic rate. All the different myths that are showing up in these health trends that are complicated for people to understand. We want to break that down in this podcast, help you understand more about those details, and start to create a structure and a platform to really take control of your health.
Okay, so fasting is a topic that many people, I think, are getting introduced to. It's definitely trending on social media, and it's a medicine that's been used for thousands and thousands of years, but I don't think we had a clear understanding of the science until now. Or maybe it was there and we just weren't aware of it, because now all of a sudden, culturally, it's like everybody's asking the question, like, what can fasting do for my health? You're on a 5-day fast right now, and everyone has different intentions behind why they fast. So maybe let's start talking about what your intention was in this fast. Like, I know we're leading a group right now, and we live it to lead it, so we always want to participate in what everybody else is doing. But what was your intention in doing a water fast for 5 days?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little different every time, but there's an overall theme of just wanting to be as healthy as possible. When we understand, you mentioned the science has come a long way, I think, in explaining what's been going on for thousands of years. And because our motto or the way that we operate, as you said, live it to lead it, is to not just be here longer on the planet, but have incredible health span while we're here. And fasting is a big part of regenerating the cells and rejuvenating the body and bringing down inflammation, turning off dis-ease markers in the system, getting control of the hormonal system, so regulating mood and energy and fat burning to gut restoration. There's such a long list of benefits to fasting that I want my body, my nervous system, my spiritual practice to dip its toe into that regularly enough. And that I've done too much fasting before, where I've fasted at least for 5 days every month. We did that 1 year, and I remember I was getting to fasting burnout. But at the end of that year, whereas now I think creating some structure around, the restrictive aspect of fasting and only doing that, a few times a year, like 2 to 4 times a year. Well, I guess 3 to 4 times a year, versus doing it, say, every month. So for me, it's really about all those benefits I just listed, but also, another overarching thing would be just discipline. Because it's easy to just wander in life and just sort of not have a structure or some guidelines to follow, and it's just easy to just be on this sort of seafood diet. Like, you see food, you might as well eat it. But being disciplined to avoid food for a period of time to let your body reset and heal is so important. So we have to consciously bring that into our life. Whereas maybe, thousands of years ago, or whatever the plan was back then, there was just times without food because of scarcity and agriculture wasn't up and running, and whereas in the past it would have been forced upon people as a result of the environment. Now it needs to be conscious discipline, but a conscious decision to discipline yourself to avoid food for a period of time to let your body heal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're definitely in a culture of the overconsumption because there's so much availability. So we're not eating in season anymore, and we're not even eating when we're hungry. It's like you said, we're just eating when we see it. We're like, well, we might as well.
Yeah.
Or I remember for myself, when the kids were young, they didn't finish their food. I was just eating it because I didn't want to waste food. Mm-hmm. And then that would be my nourishment. So I think being conscious and aware of like how you can use fasting is important, but it can also be very triggering for people that maybe have had a history of disordered eating and don't know that we can do it in a conscious way to help support the body. So what would you say to someone that maybe has a history of not really relating to food as its nourishment, but instead it's been used as maybe a weapon or deprivation because of control challenges? So there's so many different elements that will contribute to our relationship with food. And then, you know, if you see somebody on TikTok or Instagram talk about fasting and then they try it and all of a sudden they're going down this spiral from an emotional standpoint. So what could somebody like that understand about fasting?
Well, you bring up such an important topic like early in this discussion, which is important, because I think many people just sort of dive in because they look like they want to lose weight and they're really, you know, concerned about how their body looks and feels and how others perceive them. And so maybe fasting for those individuals is really to just look at a way to be seen differently. And so those that do have, you know, whatever you want to call it, disordered eating to more the like classical diagnosis of bulimia or anorexia or some of these things, and you probably have more, you know, reason to speak about this. But what we've seen in our practice and the people that we coach through this experience is that what we're really trying to do is create a new relationship with your body. One that is deeply respecting of, you know, the hormonal swings that can show up from, you know, insulin changes or changes in our hormonal rhythms, which are going to drive us towards eating, or even just the changes in our hormones as a result of not feeling good about our bodies. I think there's so much happening behind the scenes that's dictating how we feel about ourselves. So when there is, you know, some of this patterning for where there's destructive behavior going on, and I'd say destructive behavior would be anything where we're denying ourselves food because of somebody else or because, you know, you mentioned intention before, that intention to not really look at food as a way to nourish ourselves, but maybe as a way to punish ourselves or to punish others. You know, going slow with this experience and or working with someone very specifically is a must, in my opinion. Because creating that relationship with food in a healthy way, I think, is the platform for which fasting can begin. And we see this in our group programs. Often we're just teaching about nutrition, and then slowly but surely getting people to walk this path of a fasting lifestyle, so that they can, you know, first develop that healthy relationship with their body, with that food, and then understand some of the other aspects that you can bring in with regards to fasting. So if I had to simplify that, creating a healthy relationship with food first and yourself, as you mentioned at the beginning, creating a clear intention, and then if there's been any sort of disruptive behavior in the past, or if that's part of your picture, definitely working with someone to get clear on those messages.
And does it have to be a water fast?
No, definitely not. Before we go there though, like what would you say, just given your own personal experience and, you know, this concept of deprivation or, you know, punishing yourself or others through the weapon of food. How do you relate to that?
I think I've shared this before on our podcast, my challenge with anorexia growing up. And when you unravel the reasons behind it, it was, for one, a sense of control, because it felt like in that moment that's all I could control in my life. And then the other element was using it as a bit of a weapon, because knowing that food was such a big part of our culture, and that is how people showed love. And so that was something that I was kind of denying in my life at that time, but also it took really one decision to shift myself out of that. But I know for many, it's not just one decision, it's multiple unraveling of different layers. So for me, it was just that one decision, and knowing how much I love food and how much I know it nourishes me, and making that shift that I really wanted to support my body was the catalyst for me to like understand my body and food in a very different way. So when I fast now, I don't do straight water fasts. Just knowing my constitution, very particular about when I'm doing it, regards to my like cycle, season, and my constitution. So the more I've learned about that and understood myself, I feel like the better my relationship is to my body.
Yeah, and obviously a lot has changed for you since those teenage years, and there's so many complications, and you mentioned cultural ones and things like that. So obviously you're going through a lot of the time, as would anybody that's you know, experiencing any sort of challenges around food and how they're being seen, and you know, their reason to use food as a weapon, either to, you know, get attention from others that they're craving attention from, or you know, all the different reasons. And so that's obviously a really important, I think, thing to uncover. But essentially you really talked about this journey of transformation, of changing your relationship to yourself, to the food, to the experience, to your culture, to your family.
Well, it was a realization that I'm actually punishing myself.
Yeah.
I'm not actually doing anything to change people around me.
Yeah.
If anything, I'm changing the trajectory of my life. And the goal was to create attention so that people can see that I'm in pain.
Yeah.
But that didn't work.
Yeah.
Like it never does. So as soon as I was able to really see that, I had to be like, okay, well, I have to take care of me.
Would you say it worked a little bit though? As in, like, your
for
needs
sure.
were met to some degree because your family saw that you were...
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then they were, you know, asking others for help because they
Yeah.
could see, like, she's not eating, like, what can we do? So there was definitely pieces of that, but it still didn't change much of what I was trying to change. And so I had to change that relationship.
Yeah, yeah. So, like to what I said before, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that's such an important conversation to have whenever we talk about, you know, pulling food away.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, there's so much fear that can come up and
Yeah.
triggers, and I think what you said in our introduction too about your metabolism going low. So if somebody is worried about different factors of aging and knowing that weight gain is a real thing around the belly, especially as we step into like perimenopause or andropause, and then you throw in fasting, but if they're understanding of taking food away equals lowered metabolism, it's going to be a harder mindset to shift because you're going to think you're going to gain more weight because of it.
Yeah, totally. We've all been conditioned to think a certain way about food, and that's part of these discussions, is to sort of break down some of the myths around what we've been told. On this topic, actually, I had a type 2 diabetic patient that came in, and she said that, oh, I tried intermittent fasting in the past and actually really worked well, but my doctor told me that diabetic patients cannot, absolutely 100% no, you should not fast. It can damage your body. And I said to the patient, to some degree, like, listen, I'm not trying to be productive to what your doctor told you, but in fact, the problem with type 2 diabetes is high insulin. And so the only way to lower insulin is to lower your carbohydrate intake, lower your protein intake, or to start to learn how to fast. So if you want to get a control of your metabolic function, your weight, your energy, your mood, your brain health, you need to learn how to fast again. And after doing it for 2 weeks, she was just like, oh my goodness, I can't believe like how much better I feel. I feel so empowered because now I can take control of my health. I can re-implement fasting because I know I felt better in the past when I did it. But to the point of these ideas get imprinted into our psychology, and then they become a reality for us just because we believe them, not because they're actually true,
Right.
metabolically or physically speaking or what have you. So this is an interesting story of someone who basically changed the trajectory of her health as a result of one conversation from her doctor. And who knows what her doctor really said and what the interpretation was. Obviously, I don't think any doctor is out to hurt their patients, but there's so much limited information, unfortunately, in conventional medicine around fasting. And thankfully for, you know, doctors like Dr. Jason Fung and Dr. Walter Longo and some of these other researchers that are really helping people to really educate that fasting can be very safe, and it can be a really powerful tool and should be utilized for most people. Yeah. So you brought up there's different kinds of fasts, right?
Yeah.
So do you want to go there now?
Yeah, so maybe talk about why you do a water fast and what happens through that.
So, you know, I mentioned all the reasons why I like to fast somewhat regularly throughout the year. Why? I mean, there's different kinds of fasts. So there's like maybe a partial fast, which might be like restricting a certain amount of calories into a smaller meal window. We usually shoot for 5 days for most of our fasting experiences, right? And the reason for the 5 days, just to throw that out there first, some of the research of Dr. Walter Longo shows that maximal stem cell production happens in this 5-day window, or maximal secretion and growth hormone increase is going to be in this sort of 5-day window. And so we were getting more benefit from doing a slightly longer than, say, 2 or 3 day fast. So that's the first thing. So one might do a partial fast, or maybe add in some fat or bone broth, or, you know, there's different ways to do fast. But ultimately, the reason I choose to do a water fast is because what I find for my own body is that energy starts to climb up around day 3. My brain starts to feel more clear. I feel more creative. My inflammation in my body goes down, as in, like, I don't wake up with as many aches and pains as I might, you know, from just the daily wear and tear. And water gets me into that state of ketosis faster than if I was to do just a smaller meal window or a partial fast, or use other things in the fasting experience. And then I really test the level of discipline in my body by, you know, letting myself know I'm pausing certain things for a period of time, and I'm feeling really rewarded as a result of doing that. So there's many layers of experience that show up as a result of a water fast versus, you know, some of these other types.
So if somebody just did a 2-day water fast, would that be enough and beneficial? Because that might be a question that the listeners are having. Well, okay, well, I can't do 5 right away, and nor do we recommend just jumping into a fast. There's a certain way that we teach so that people understand how to utilize fasting the best for their constitution and their bodies. But what if somebody just starts with 2 days?
Yeah, well, I think you said it. I don't care if someone's doing 1 day water fast or 5 days. Or you might need a little bit more lead time with a 5-day fast, but I think everyone should prepare properly, because why not show up with your best foot forward instead of saying, look, oh, I'm going to try this. Well, why not prepare yourself, even if you're about to do a 1 or 2 day fast? And that's this process, we call it the metabolic upgrade, which is where you're going through this 4-week experience of really training your body to be more efficient in this time away from food. Because I think, you know, if we were to enter into this experience and maybe we had a really crappy time, we may not want to do it again. Right? So I'd rather everybody get prepared physiologically, mentally, understand the science behind it, so that you can practice. It's a practice. It's not like, I'm going to try this, I'm moving on to the next interesting thing. We really, as we teach, this needs to be a lifestyle change that people implement. So why not set yourself up for success so that you can be really easily move through a 1-2 day water fast, 3-day water fast, or be more prepared for a 5-day. So in my opinion, I think that the same preparation should be involved in leading into that experience. What about you?
Yeah, I think for me, knowing thyself first. So I like looking at Ayurvedic constitutions. So me being someone that's got a Vata constitution, it's very clearly stated in Ayurvedic medicine that I should not do more than 2 days of water fasting, and even that's a bit of a stretch. And so that actually gave me permission to find other ways to have the same results. So what I've learned for me is doing about 3 days of partial, so that's me preparing to get into the water fast. I can do then the 2-day water fast, no problem. So I think it's important to know yourself, know your hormones, know your constitution, so then you can make the proper decisions and then learn how to prepare for the fast that you decide.
Yeah, and you've been doing this for years.
Yeah.
So you're like, this is something I think that's important for listeners too, is that we're sort of always preparing for a fast of some sort.
Right.
In the sense that you're becoming metabolically efficient. So if there's time away from food, your body knows how to shift gears relatively easy, in comparison to someone who's just eating the standard American diet with snacks through the day and just going, okay, I want to try a water fast, and bang, they get into it, and they may have a really crappy time with it, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing I think what fasting allowed us to do is to reconsider what our daily habits were going to look like outside of a fast.
Yeah.
So you start to learn that, okay, I actually don't need to snack. That's more habit than anything. That's more correlation, or we're watching a movie with the kids, so that means we need a bowl of popcorn or whatever it is. It's usually more habit than necessity for nutrition. So when you start to realize that, you're like, hey, well, I can get rid of those snacks, don't need those anymore. That in itself tries to change the metabolic health of an individual.
So what do you think is the most important place to start for someone? Like, you know, again, this is stuff that we teach in our course, but what do you think, you know, you keep bringing up this, you know thyself experience. Like, what do you think is the most important thing that people can start to do when they start on a journey like this?
Like physically in terms of
It could be
food?
physically, it could be a mindset, it could be anything. Like, where do you
Well, I
think a
would
starting
think
point?
starting with mindset first, knowing your why. So maybe your why is to lose a little bit of weight, and that's okay. But knowing that intention first, and then getting the tools to understand how you can slowly get to a place where you can fast a little bit more. So maybe if you're eating 5 times a day, like your trainer has told you, because that was the old way of regulating your blood sugar throughout the day, maybe you just take away the snacks and you're just eating the 3 meals and see how that feels. And you shrink your window just a little bit, see how that feels. For women, I would say track your cycle. See what kind of cravings you're having throughout your cycles. Figure out, is it easier for you in your first half to have a shorter window of eating, and then maybe you expand that window in the second half of your cycle. So just start to become curious about the needs of your body, but then also recognizing, is it an actual need or is it just a habit that's been there for a long time? And so maybe you just start off with taking the snacks away, you're just eating those 3 meals, and then you go down to the 2 meals and see how that feels. And then from there, you can bring in maybe a 24-hour fast to see how that feels in your body too. So just experimenting with what feels good for you.
Yeah, literally what you laid out is a sequence for people to experiment with, to see how their body metabolically adapts, as in like how well do you feel as far as energy goes, maybe brain fog, endurance, the fatigue levels, like your ability to move through your day without much struggle. Really, that's what you're sort of pulsing into your life, right?
Yeah, and I love hearing that from patients when I'll first say, okay, let's just start with a 24-hour fast. Oh, I can't. I don't know if I can do it. And then they'll reach like the 20-hour mark and they're like, oh my God, I did it. So maybe, the first time it is only 20 hours, but they feel amazing.
Yeah.
And it's such a feeling of victory of like, oh, this thing that I thought was so hard, but I can actually do it. So then the next time they do 22 hours and then they jump into the 24.
Yeah.
So I think just that gaining that feeling of like, here's something that I was told never to do that's going to bring about pain, but actually it's the opposite. You feel so much better and clearer.
Yeah. And remember back when I was first fasting, and then I remember you would like tell the staff, make sure you get this guy some food because he's got so much buzzy energy. He must be like low blood sugar because like he's maybe extra productive or energetic or like
He always has shaky hands.
manic or something. Like there's
Yeah, you
something
seem manic.
interesting going on with my nervous system when I was learning how to fast. And to me, I was like, I feel great. I can go the whole day and I can eat dinner when I come home, or just have 2 meals a day. This is when I was first starting to experiment, and it was mind blowing to see how much more energy I had, because we had a newborn at that time. Like we weren't sleeping well. You were sleeping worse, obviously, than I was, but the point is that we didn't have a solid recovery plan like most people with like older kids or that aren't being interrupted multiple times in the night. So I was feeling unhealthy before I started it, and it was mind-blowing. I literally didn't get a cold for like 5 or 6 years after I first started implementing it. And so I saw the profound benefit of fasting on my immune system. Like it was unbelievable.
So something to highlight there. I didn't start with you because, like you said, we had a newborn, I was nursing, and so I was at a very different place than you were. But what can happen in a couple is that we see our partner do something and we're like, okay, if you have maybe a competitive edge, that you want to match them.
You kind of do.
I do, but I knew I couldn't fast. Obviously, I was so hungry because I was nursing. But I think it's important if you as a couple are starting to go on this adventure together to recognize that how men fast is different than how women fast.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you mentioned some of that earlier, which was regards to like whether you're in perimenopause or menopause, where you are in your cycle, because that's going to matter too. So I think highlighting that for women. And then, for men, because we don't have this monthly cycle and we don't necessarily, we don't need to depend on that cycle as part of our, monthly rhythm, and how food restriction or closing our meal window could impact us over like this longer experience.
Yeah,
really.
like we need food to create hormones.
Yeah.
So
we both do, right?
Yes.
But it's just, more particular to your cycle.
Yeah, with like the estrogen and the progesterone and all of that. So we need more because they're all being made from cholesterol. So if we're not getting enough nourishment, we're not going to have enough to, it's like, some people or women when they're an athlete and maybe they have more of a restrictive diet and yet they're
And
burning
high
so
training,
much
yeah.
energy at the same time, you usually get some sort of secondary amenorrhea where they're not bleeding at all because they're not producing the hormones that they need.
Yeah. Well, it's important to bring this up too, because if someone is starting to do too much fasting, again,
Yeah.
man or woman, also pay attention to those signs.
Yeah,
Right.
like
So that'd be
hair
one.
loss
Yeah.
is a huge one that a lot of women will experience. But yeah, irregularity in your cycle. Some women actually gain weight when they're not getting enough food in their diet. So paying attention to like the nuances that are happening, because sometimes we find something that works and then we overdo it. So this is where the talk around like seasons too, of like what's the right season to fast, or season of life, but also season when it comes to like fall, winter, spring, and summer, recognizing what's the best time to like limit those eating windows. So if we look at our ancestry, perhaps during the winter time there was less available. And so, you know, we're going to probably be in a little bit more ketosis naturally, or need to be in that. And then summertime comes, there's more availability for carbohydrates. So what you eat is going to be different, and our microbiome changes throughout the year too. So I think there's so many nuances we have to pay attention to when we're making decisions about food and fasting that we forget, because we find one solution and then we run with it for the entire year.
Yeah. Which is essentially what I did that one
Yeah.
year.
We fasted every month.
Because I saw it as a challenge. Here's a challenge.
Sometimes for like 10 days.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I learned a ton from it too.
You did, yeah.
So like there's value there too, but maybe a little
And
bit
I
to the
learned what
detriment.
not to do.
Yeah, exactly. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you brought up this thing about men and women having different experience, potentially, and also just, you know, from one person to the next might have a different experience. And so how do we help people sort of navigate that challenge? Because some people might do really great, and you know, if you use weight loss as a marker, weight loss is very easy for one person, where it may be more challenging for someone else. Where do people get, say, metabolically stuck, or what else needs to shift when thinking about implementing fasting? Like, what are some other things you think of for people when they get stuck?
Well, stress levels.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, so if we're not learning ways to manage our cortisol, then it's really hard to manage our glucose levels and our insulin at the same time. So making sure we're working on our nervous system while we're implementing something like this, because if we feel like we're doing all the right things but yet nothing is shifting in our weight, we want to look at those hormones like cortisol, so that's stress. Then we want to look at our other hormones and toxicity that could be contributing to that load. And maybe there's some movement, but then all of a sudden we hit a plateau and we get stuck. So we need to do a deeper dive of like, okay, what could be, you know, putting an extra load in my bucket? So is that toxicity in my environment? The quality of the food that I'm eating in my window, like what does that look like? Because I know there's been studies that were done where intermittent fasting worked and the people were just eating whatever they wanted. But then, yes, it may work for a short period of time, but you want to look at the quality of the oils you're having, the foods you're eating, so that you can actually get maximum results.
And you brought up a good point here, and that's know thyself, right? So
Yeah.
paying attention to, you know, when something works, when it stops working, being able to break down some of the obstacles to why we're not getting better. And this is where, like, knowing your numbers. If you can know your hormonal levels, maybe through a Dutch test, you know,
Yeah.
to look at all the different sex hormones, the cortisol rhythm, the DHEA, all that rhythm throughout the day,
Yeah.
that's super important.
Maybe doing a DNA test.
DNA test to
Yeah.
find out which kind of foods are you're predisposed to, you know, managing or breaking down well, you know, how you're breaking down toxins, you know. So heavy metal test too could be another one if there's a toxicity load going into someone's, you know, health bucket, so to speak. And then the other one is like just looking at your blood sugar levels, looking at your ketone levels. You know, we have many people that do intermittent fasting and their blood sugar is still high, their insulin's still high. And so they're not making progress because they haven't actually quantitatively looked at what their metabolism is doing. And so I did a little experiment this time. Right?
Yes. Oh, that's where you were going with this.
Yeah, well, it's like you brought up know thyself, and then to someone that might be like, I can know myself through my behaviors, my patterns, through my emotional state, how mood changes throughout my monthly cycle, if you're a woman, or for a man, like what are things that trigger me emotionally, or maybe there's food addiction, or emotional eating, where we're changing our behavior with food just because we're emotionally stressed out. Those are all super important to take a look at, and we can get some objective data. So, you know, we mentioned some tests. So one of the things that I'm doing, can't see it right now, but I've got a little patch on the back of my tricep, and it's called a continuous glucose monitor. And basically I take my phone and I tap it onto this little glucose monitor, and it gives me a real-time reading of my blood glucose levels. And we saw some interesting stuff. So I put this on a day before I started my fast, and I had some food that I don't usually have, and I saw some wild waking glucose numbers. And then I saw some dips and crashes as I got into my fast. But what is so interesting to me with this continuous glucose monitor is that your blood sugar is constantly changing throughout the day. So even when we're getting a fasting glucose with someone, it's kind of making me think differently about that. And like, what's your diet been like for the last week? What are your current stress levels? How did you sleep last night? What are some of these like actual really interesting variables that can actually spike your blood glucose because your cortisol shot up, right?
Yeah. Well, that's important to differentiate, because when people get tested for diabetes and whatnot, often they're just looking at fasting glucose.
Totally.
But you want to be looking at your fasting insulin, obviously your hemoglobin A1C, because the fasting glucose is just a reflection of your day, really, or the night before, in that moment. So like you said, maybe you woke up a bit stressed out, or maybe you didn't have a good sleep, or maybe the night before you had popcorn at the movie theater.
Right, yeah. Double whammy. Bad fats, bad carbs, right?
Yeah, so maybe like those things will influence that morning, but yet the diagnosis happens according to that one number. So I think looking at the full picture is so important.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the other thing that I've seen is like, obviously with exercise, blood sugar goes up, and that's important for people to know too. Like so emotional stress, and then the food choices obviously have a huge effect on what that blood glucose does. And like, it's not just what you ate today, it's what you ate yesterday, the day before, maybe even a week before, that's dictating your body's ability to regulate your blood sugar. So this is why we said, at the beginning of this talk, it's like, if you start creating structure and have some form and sort of a roadmap for getting a handle of your hormonal system, it has to start with learning how to have time away from food and creating that new relationship to food through this process of fasting. Yeah, it's cool to see, again, creating the you diet that we always talk about, right? So the more you know, and you can see, okay, well, I ate this food and it increased my blood sugar, or I ate this food and actually stabilized or lowered. It'll give you more of a clue, even with healthy foods, of what's going to influence it. Yeah, and so extremely powerful. Now, what are some other ways that we test our blood? So glucose, ketone meters. What are we looking for there? You want me? You're like trying to bounce that one back to me?
Yeah, maybe. So yeah, ketones, we're looking at if they're going up while you're on a fast, so we can see that your body is now going from sugar burning to fat burning, because we have fat around our cells, around our organs. So to talk about a bit of a story, maybe I've shared this on the podcast before, but when we were in school and doing a cadaver lab, there were two women that we were working on, and one woman was a little bit curvier, whereas the other woman wasn't. So on the outside in looking, you would think that, maybe the other woman didn't have a healthy diet or what was going on. But when we actually did the cadaver, the skinnier woman had more fat around her organs than the other woman did. And so from the outside in, you don't know how much is available, and there's so much energy available around those organs. So that is what fasting also allows, is for us to burn away some of that fat, because then we can use it as ketones. Yeah,
and this is sort of the metabolic conundrum that most people are stuck in, is that most people, based on eating the standard American diet or having snacks every few hours, they're metabolically dependent on glucose.
Yeah.
And those little mitochondria, those little energy producing, organelles inside of our cells, as sugar goes up, we don't need as many of them per cell, because there's just a plentiful supply of glucose waiting to be used.
Yeah.
And that works until it doesn't. So when it doesn't work anymore, that's type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance, all the things that lead us to weight gain, brain fog, all the symptoms we just previously described. So this alternative fuel, I like to say we have a hybrid engine. We also have fat that's waiting to be used, to the point of like the fat that's around our visceral organs, the fat that's under subcutaneous, like under our skin. There's thousands of calories waiting to be used. And so when people are stuck in this old model of caloric counting, we're only counting the food that's going in. We're not actually metabolically counting any of the fat that's waiting to be utilized in storage, because we're not actually learning or understanding that we tap into that when we have time away from food. And so the whole idea of getting a certain amount of calories in through the day just doesn't make sense when you actually look at
Be kind of
hormones.
cool to like have a screening device that you like step into, you eat something, and then
Yeah.
you can see what's happening, almost like a X-ray or MRI,
Right.
to show you where all the particles
Where the
are
energy
going.
is going, yeah. That maybe
That might be a
maybe
future
Kyan will
thing.
create one day.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I just had a thought. I was thinking about the Jetsons for some reason.
Right.
And just kind of going through this like, or that Dr. Seuss book, Inside Your Outside.
Oh yeah,
right?
inside your outside. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get to see where all the
Yeah.
food is going.
Yeah, exactly.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
But so on that point, really what we're looking at is are our hormones working efficiently to bring, like, so insulin in particular, is it efficiently working to grab that sugar that's in the glucose, or so in the blood, to drive that into the cell to give that glucose to the mitochondria for energy.
And this is like the number one challenge a perimenopausal woman has, because she becomes more insulin resistant and the sensitivity to insulin goes down. So it's harder for insulin to actually grab on to that glucose and push it into the cell.
Yeah. So another factor, people are doing intermittent fasting. Here's another sort of thing to pay attention to is, I can't tell you how many of our patients are doing intermittent fasting now, because it's obviously trendy and people are learning more about it, but they're still eating way too late at night.
Yeah.
And this is so important because we are more insulin resistant as the night goes on. So we're completely dependent on our circadian clock. So even if someone has a messed up sleep schedule, or they're shift working, or they're just going to bed too late, or they're eating too late at night, the body's getting mixed signals. And so it's going to be harder to get our weight loss goals or energy goals or all the different goals for why someone maybe would have implemented intermittent fasting to begin with. And if you haven't closed the kitchen early enough at night, it's going to have a huge effect on your waking blood glucose.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, so it's just looking at how out of rhythm are you with your body.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that's part of knowing thyself, right? So if we can't get clear on, just how our day is set up, right? If we don't go to bed on time, if we're not waking up consistently at a certain time, if we don't have a bit of a morning routine that metabolically lets our body know what's happening, or even like delaying our caffeine intake. There's so many little tweaks that we can do to our daily schedule that optimizes our hormonal function, right?
Yeah, so fasting, it's a big topic.
Yeah. Feels like you're sort of putting a stamp in
I think so. I think that's a lot for people to digest.
emotionally or
Yeah.
cognitively digest. Yeah. Okay. So that's fasting. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's so much more we can talk about on this topic, but I think that's a lot to digest. So, in summary, I would say know thyself before you embark on the journey. If you're already on the journey, do a deeper dive. Maybe get the CGM, maybe do a DNA test, maybe do all these things to kind of recognize, okay, how can I upgrade the fasting that I'm already doing? And knowing that it is something that everyone can do, you just have to find your way.
Now you put the pin in it.
I put the pin in it.
To be continued.
Yes.
Yeah. So you may have been following us for a little while, or maybe you're brand new to our channel. Either way, we want you to have the opportunity to really deepen your experience of what you're learning. Either you worked with us virtually, you've done some of our courses, but we want to give you the opportunity to be in the fold of our community, to be with us more regularly, and that's the Health Ignited Club.
Yeah, community is so important to us, and we learn so much from each other. And I think getting together when we do once a month, it just invites us to ask more questions about ourselves, about our journey, about our health. So we would love for all of you to join us there.
Yeah, and so much of our health plans are really dictated around life. Life is crazy, life is challenging. It's easy to fall off the wagon, so to speak. And we've got a touch point each month, and we've got resources for you in the membership portal. There's so much to keep you in the momentum and the motivation of really making everything that you're learning into a lifestyle practice.
It's all about accountability and support.
Yeah, so join us there at Health Ignited Club.